So it seems like every company out there is wanting to make that slightly overstable control driver for their lineup, with the most recent offerings being the Honor, the Feedback, and the Vanguard. But what makes these discs so special that almost every pro wants one in their bag? And how much usefulness does it add for us amateurs? Well, to answer that, we're gonna have to go back to talk about the birth of control drivers. Now, for the longest time, the control driver slot in the bag just didn't exist. There were putters, mid-ranges, fairways, which were normally about 7 to 8 speeds. Then there were your distance drivers, which were your like wraiths, destroyers, bosses, those kind of things. Now there were some control drivers, but those are more on like the understable side to give you more distance over your fairway drivers before they even had high-speed drivers. So like they had the Beast, the Valkyrie. They did have the Orc, which you could find more overstable ones, but most of the time they were made to turn a little bit and have more of a distance driver type flight to it. But it wasn't until Discmania released the PD in I think 2008 was the true control driver like born. Because before that, if you wanted to control down the fairways, you would mainly go for the T-Bird, and everyone loved the T-Bird. The T-Bird was like the go-to fairway driver for control. And ever since it came out, everyone was wondering what the longer T-Bird would be that gives you the same control, the same accuracy, but go further down the fairways. And the PD was it. The only difference though is the PD didn't have a ton of glide and it was a little on the more overstable side. So it was more like a utility driver than it was a cyclable control driver like the T-Bird was. But then after Paul three-peated at Worlds, that's when the Thunderbird was born. Basically took the great things about the PD, made it a touch less overstable and a lot more glide to give it that more distance down the fairway and have it be more of a staple control cycling driver. And that's exactly what Paul did. He shredded with Thunderbirds. For those of you COVID golfers, you should look up some past tournaments of Paul, and he just shreds courses with his Rock 3s and his Thunderbirds. He threw and utilized those Thunderbirds as if they were his distance drivers, just a ton more accuracy. And I think that's where a lot of companies are aiming for, that Thunderbird-esque spot. Not that the PD is bad, the PD is great. The Thunderbird is just a little bit more of a go-to cycling workhorse fairway driver, control driver than the PD is. Now, of course, they're not exactly like Thunderbirds. They're all tweaked just a little bit. So like the Honor, for example, this one is more on the overstable side of Thunderbirds. Like it still has a pretty decent glide, but it'll hook up a lot sooner than Thunderbirds in my opinion, but not quite as much as a PD would. Or this Feedback, for example. This one's like similar to a Thunderbird in the sense that it flies a little straighter and hooks up. I don't know if it would give you as much of a finish as the Honor, and it has less glide though, for sure. So this one takes a little bit more power, kind of like a PD would, to get it to distance, at least with my arm speed. Then you have the Vanguard, which is a more straight Thunderbird made by Discmania. It feels a little bit more comfortable in the rim because of the rounded edges, but both the Vanguard and the Feedback are on apollodiscgolf.com. And this is the last week where we're doing our promo with orders over $60 getting free shipping and orders over $50 getting a free mini. So if you want to check that out, apollodiscgolf.com, I'll have it in the link in the description. We have new stock of Discmania, Prodigy, and Trilogy on the site. So yeah, check it out. Now, why is this slot in the bag so revolutionary for pros? Well, this Thunderbird slot, it is the perfect combination of the control of a T-Bird type disc and the distance of a high-speed distance driver like a Destroyer, Boss, Raider, Rive, that sort. Or at least it's each company's interpretation of the best combination of those two. Like even Paul McBeth, when he was throwing Thunderbirds, he said that those would be going just as far, if not farther sometimes, than some of his distance drivers. And it still maintained that nice control that he had with, say, his T-Birds before. So those really filled a gap for the pros that was always missing, at least before 2008. And especially with the courses just getting longer and longer, having a disc like this in the bag for pros is invaluable, and a lot of them won't go without it. Now, what about us amateurs? Because if you didn't know, the farther you throw, the more gaps you have between your discs. And that goes for both distance gaps and stability gaps. That's part of the reason why pros can beat up discs so fast, because one, they play a lot more than us, but two, they throw harder, so they can see smaller differences that we might not be able to see, but they can see because they're throwing it farther. And that's also why pros can justify having like 30, 35 discs in their bag is because they're throwing harder, and so there's more gaps to fill in their bag, both in stability and distance. But for us AMs, with not as many distance gaps, that would mean the gap between, say, like a T-Bird 3 and a Grace, not very large to fill 4 AMs. So if you saw my in the bag video, you might notice that I don't carry control drivers, mainly because at my arm speed, which is, there's a plane, but at my arm speed, which is about like 375, 380, I don't see much difference between a T-Bird 3 and something like the Feedback, for example. My T-Bird 3, or even my more stable T-Bird 3 that's close to this in stability, they go just as far as any of these control drivers that I threw. The only one that like got any more distance on a more consistent basis would be my Vulture. This is the only one that gave me more distance. And even then, it was only like maybe 5 feet, which I know some of you are like, well, that makes your 25 footer a 20 footer, or a 20 footer a 15 footer. Yeah, but I mean, 5 feet is not that big of a difference at all. And that's like if I hit it right. Majority of the time, this would fly just as far as this. For me, I don't think most AMs have a big enough gap to fill with control drivers, at least for distance. The one exception I think you might find with amateurs is just the difference in the flight in general. Because these are a little bit faster and they're a little bit more stable, they are a little bit better for forehands over, say, like a T-Bird or an Explorer, for example. So for those who want something to forehand off the tee that's a little straighter than, say, something like a Firebird, or it doesn't go as far, or it's more stable and consistent than a distance driver, someone might like the Feedback a lot in their bag. Now, it doesn't necessarily fit my game per se, so that's why I mainly stick with fairway drivers, then I skip to distance drivers, because I just don't have that big of a gap to fill between those two. But I know a lot of AMs do throw control drivers, so if you're one of those people, let me know in the comments why you choose to do so, or if you're like me and don't throw control drivers, tell me why as well. So, but yeah, it doesn't make the Feedback any less of a disc. I think it's great, and honestly, the 500 plastic, their plastic in general, feels so nice in my opinion, and they've gotten rid of the flashing for all of you people who complain about that. Like all the stuff we got, it feels great. So check it out, polythescope.com, and see you in the next one.